and welcome to Share, Learn, Connect. Whether you are listening in the car, the gym, at your desk, on site, whilst you clean your floors or take your dog for a walk. This is a monthly podcast series where fellow Downer employees talk about how to embrace difference through leadership. You are going to hear them share their stories of resilience and personal growth and reflect about pivotal moments in their personal and professional lives. I am Georgia Lutby, and I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet today. Downer employs people across more than 300 sites, primarily in Australia and New Zealand, but also in the Asia Pacific region, South America and Africa. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of First Peoples across all of the various lands, their ongoing cultures and connections to the land, sea and community. You are going to love our topic and guest today, where we talk about all things relationships. Relationships certainly are a big part of our lives. Whilst it's true that in both personal and professional relationships, people should respect one another and strive for absolute excellence, it's also true that the stakes are very different in the two types of relationships. Our guest today is no stranger to this month's topic, and it is with great excitement that I introduce you to Nikki Poteri-Collie. Nikki is a senior leader within Downer and is also a member of the Facilities and Asset Services leadership team. Welcome, Nikki! Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Georgia. I've been in the construction and engineering industry for many years. I started with a civil engineering cadetship and then went on and did further studies in business, accounting and strategy. On a personal note, I have a very understanding husband, which is why I'm able to do the work that I do, and also have 2 adult children.
Today's conversation, and one of the things that came out most about you, Nikki, was about relationships creating success, which obviously is a big part of Downer, and relationships are so important within the Downer landscape. And so I wanted to ask you, what do relationships mean to you, and how have they changed your career or brought you to where you are now?
It's a really broad question. I mean, relationships touch everything that we do. It creates the teams that we work in. It creates the relationships, is what we create with our customers to deliver value. Relationships underpin every part of our lives, relationships at home, relationships, outside of work.
That's awesome. And we'll touch on that as we go through. We'll come back to that relationships. And I think that's been a really strong part of how you got to where you are based on your hard work and the relationships as well. You grew up in a Greek family in Dalby.
I did.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? What was your upbringing?
Well, I was born in Dalby. It was wonderful. Mum and Dad owned the fish and chip shop in the main street of the town, which is pretty typical for a Greek family. So I grew up going to school and then going back to the shop after work and picking out on all the lollies and milkshakes and ice creams. And, I grew up, had so many fish and chips that I hated chips. I had too many of them.
Do you still hate them?
No. I sort of got over that in the last few years. It was a really wonderful time. I was there till I was about 10 years of age. Both my parents having been born in Greece, they spoke Greek in the household. It was my first language. So I had a strong sort of sense of the Greek culture that was sort of embedded in me throughout that time. So
and what is that Greek culture?
Very strong sense of family. If you take the movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, that's it.
Awesome. I love it. And those early days, growing up in the fish and chip shop and going to school and then coming back to the fish and chip shop, what sort of values do you think that instilled in you from that really early age?
I would work in the shop as well while I was picking out on the ice creams. And I learned how to take money, like make milkshakes, take money, put it in the cash register and all that. So I got a sense of what it was to be in business. As a child, though, watching Mum and Dad work hard.
What was the multicultural landscape like in Dalby? Was somebody from Greek heritage?
It's interesting, I never realised I was not Aussie while I was living in Dalby, if you know what I mean. We had the Greek culture and that was very strong, but I didn't feel different until I moved to Brisbane.
And why is that, do you think?
The first time I encountered racism was when I moved to Brisbane. Like, even to the point when I was 13, my grandmother wanted to take me back to Greece for a few months. And she said, come along, you can come and spend 6 months with me over in Greece and go to school there. And I went, no. She really tried hard to convince me. I would not go because I didn't want to be Greek.
So you really detached yourself from the culture in those early days.
It tore me down.
And how do you think that's changed you from those days in school to now in your career?
The one pet hate of mine above all else is racism.
Yep.
You know, we make judgments about people because they look a certain way or they come from a certain culture.
Yep.
And that's the one thing that just I cannot tolerate. And I think that's what that's created. How dare you pass judgment on me because I look a little bit different to you?
Absolutely. And I think, I guess one of the main topics today is relationships. And I think from my observation, from you growing up with that, relationships are so important to you now, and that understanding of other people and not judging people based on what they look like or where they came from, but based on who they are and what they've done. Is that a fair observation?
Yes.
After those formative years and you've left school, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I didn't know. So I took 12 months off and I started thinking about what are my options then. I said, I wonder what engineering's all about. And my uncle, my mother's brother, happened to be an electrical engineer in Sydney. So I asked him, I said, Uncle Moscow, tell me, what does an engineer do? What's involved in engineering? And his response was, listen, don't worry about it. Girls don't do engineering.
So you decided to study engineering. What was it like in that course?
I was the only female in all my classes, which isn't a surprise, I guess. The course itself was wonderful. Like, it was great. I never really experienced anything different there. I even had a female lecturer in one of my latter years, and I remember that.
Because she stood out.
Because she was a female lecturer.
Did you find it hard in those early days at uni looking around and being the only female?
I didn't really think twice. The only time I felt any sort of sense of being out of place or discrimination was during my cadetship. Not to begin with, as when I went into somebody's team who didn't believe women belonged in engineering.
And can you tell me a little bit more about that experience?
So to begin with, I had a really good experience, good bosses in the public service at the time. The hierarchy was based on the size of your chair.
Can you explain that to me? It's like physically the size of your chair?
So the chief construction engineer sat in his office and he had a throne, basically, a nice big comfy chair with arms, high back and all of that. And then right down the other end of the spectrum was a little round stool with no back, no sides. And in the middle you had, the chairs with the back, no arms. Then you had the bigger chairs and then, if you can imagine a hierarchy in chairs. So I arrived and I think it was in my second year or third year, and whilst all my peers had a chair with a back, I was given a stool, little round stool.
Wow. So
sat in the corner.
How did you feel?
Yeah, I guess it took me a while to understand it. I was grateful I had a big brother who was in Crown Law at the time, who was in the public service, and I started telling him about it, and he was really pissed off to hear about it, and I would get all the crap works and stuff, but then it came time for my performance review, and I thought I did some pretty good work, and I was certainly getting good feedback from everybody in the office and stuff like that. But he gave me a scathing review.
Wow.
And marked me right down the bottom for everything. And back in those days, there was always a room at the back of the review for the person, me, to provide my feedback. But the done thing was not to provide any feedback yourself. You just take what's given to you and then it gets processed. Because if you fill anything in there, it goes to the Public Service Board. And so it was a bit of a no-no. It was known to be a no-no. You just don't put anything there. And my big brother coached me and he goes, you're going to write it and you're going to write it all and you're just going to do it. So I did. And I gave my critique of him as a manager and what he had done. And he was pissed big time. But what I found through that, though, so yes, it did go to the Public Service Board. He went right up to the Commissioner and then to the Public Service Board. The Deputy Commissioner of Water Resources turned out to be a great supporter of mine.
Wow.
He took me aside, he understood, he spoke to me and, basically said, good on you for calling it out. And, so then I sort of felt supported. So, and then he moved on.
Wow. And so that experience, do you think that impacts you now as a leader in the business in terms of how you work with your team members and perhaps your more junior team members especially?
Oh, definitely. I think so. I think one, it was great because it gave me courage. Thankfully, I had my brother behind me to do that, to help me, because I would never have done it if he hadn't have pushed me to.
Absolutely.
But it sort of it gives me a recognition now of how the power imbalance in organisations, and how we can easily, without realising it, put people in a position like that where they feel unsupported or not in control, or whatever. So it sort of does give me that lens.
Absolutely. And I think that shows through in terms of definitely seeing you with your approach towards graduates, for example. I know that you take a lot of time to work with them and develop them and bring them into your team. And I think that obviously shows, now I hear your story, I can see exactly where that comes from and what started that. So you worked in that role, and I understand you went back to study. Is that
I
right?
did.
And what sparked that decision?
Well, after 6 years in that engineering role, I couldn't see a future for me actually in engineering as a woman. So I thought the only way I was going to make it, because I loved the construction industry, the only way I was going to make a career and get anywhere was if I did business.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I went back and studied a Bachelor of Business and did some IT on the side of that as well.
And were you working at that same time as studying that course?
Yep.
In engineering?
No, I had a couple of jobs as I sort of transitioned into that accounting space and eventually joined TEAS.
And what was that experience like compared to where you'd been prior to that?
Oh my God, it was it was very different to government. It was wonderful. They really took development of their people seriously, and they would rotate us every 6 months. So everybody in the function had to have had experience at site.
Wow.
So it gives you that lens of the whole business, and it was wonderful, wonderful experience.
Sounds like.
That's why I'm very passionate about our people that work in functions getting out to see the operations, because only then can you really understand where the money's made and also the conditions people have to work in.
Story about you being invited by your boss to his place of residence for a meal. Can you share that?
That's the managing director.
The
So he
managing
wasn't my
director.
direct boss.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about culture, I
Yeah.
think really epitomised what that actually means. So yes, so about 6 weeks or 8 weeks after I started as an assistant accountant, everybody in that building got an invitation to Martin Albrecht's house for dinner one night. So we went along there, and it was on a Saturday night. He had a beautiful home. Went to the front door, and there was Martin standing at the front door greeting guests as they came in. And as soon as I showed up, he put his hand out and he said, "Nikki, so glad you could come here tonight. Thank you very much for coming. And I hear you did civil engineering."
Wow.
And I was just gobsmacked. I mean, he remembered my name. He obviously probably had somebody sitting behind him whispering in his ear, but the fact that he cared enough to actually address me by name, and then, my God, he actually knew where I'd come from and what I'd studied. It's like, holy cow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
He's a legend. So, and he is, to this day, he's a legend.
That is so. And how did you feel going to that dinner?
I was excited. I didn't know what to expect. Was I nervous? A little bit, because I was still new and I was still getting to know people. Yeah, it was great.
And what impact did that experience have on the rest of your time?
Well, that was a great introduction to what it was like to be there, because they did that sort of thing a lot. I found after that, they really celebrated their people and the success of their people, and values were very, very strong, very important. The value of respect. Everybody's time is valuable, and if you turn up at a meeting 5 minutes late, that's a show of disrespect.
And that still stands today, because I noticed you're a couple of minutes early to our meeting, so it's obviously one of those long-standing belief systems. I understand you, at some point, you decided to start a family and to step away, and I understand that you resigned from your role at that point. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you talk me a little bit about that decision and how you came to that?
Well, back then, maternity leave wasn't a real thing, but what really drove me with that, from a personal point of view, I know and recognise I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I knew I couldn't do both things at the same time to the standards I would expect. And so I guess I made the call then to resign. Mind you, I did resign, but basically, they had me on the hook the whole time. So I was out of the permanent workforce for about 6 or 7 years. And this is a lesson that I've sort of held on to, and I think it's a lesson for all leaders, that my manager, he stayed in contact with me throughout the whole time, and he would continue ringing me up saying, oh, we've got this project, I need you to come back and do this. It's only a few months, but, you can set your own hours. And he would just keep me on the hook that, only you can do it, Nikki. And when I turn up, it's like, anybody could have done this. But it made me feel like I was still connected to the organisation.
And do you think that Nikki, growing up in Dalby in the fish and chip shop with a Greek family, would be proud of Nikki now?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah?
I think so. You're going to make me cry.
Oh, sorry, Nikki. I'm going to give you a big hug.
Yeah, no,
I think she would be very proud, and I think that many listening will be very inspired. I think you have the legacy that one day when you leave Downer, one of admiration and someone who takes the time for people and who genuinely cares. So I think it'll be well and truly there.
That means a lot.
Thank you very much for your time, Nikki. It has been such a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thanks, Georgia.
See ya.
Yeah.
I hope that you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Nikki today as much as I enjoyed recording it. It was such a pleasure to hear her share stories about relationships and how they've created success for her over the years, both personally and professionally. It was such a pleasure hearing her share her memories of meeting with the managing director at his home and how the connection that he built with her has left such a lasting legacy on her as a person and also on her professional leadership style. And before we finish up, I would like to take the time to acknowledge the Yuggera people, the traditional custodians of the land where this episode has been recorded. Make sure you tune into next month where I speak to a brand new guest about a brand new topic as we continue to share, learn, connect. Our producers are Darby Martinelli and Melanie Blows, and I'm Georgia Lutby. Thank you for listening.